Hey guys, what we're going to take a look at today is introduction to variables in GameMaker, looking at some of the properties of objects and just manipulating a few different variables to get a little tank controller to work. So what I've got here is a top-down tank minus the turret. I haven't drawn the turret on here. And we're going to create an object for that. So I'm going to create an object and I'm going to call it object tank. If you're doing DT in New Zealand, then this is really important that you name these things appropriately and talk about them in your reports, making sure that consistency of file names. So I'm going to call this object tank player because later on I'll probably add an enemy and I'm going to assign that sprite to it. Now I'm going to add an event, and the event is the create event. This is the code that gets run when the program starts. Now I actually prefer to use code, and a lot of my students prefer to use code as well, because simple reason that using code is much easier than trying to explain and understand the relative other object bit up the top here. It all makes sense in code. In drag and drop, not so much. So I'm going to use the code here. And we're going to create two variables. The tank's movement is going to be reliant on a move speed. So this is going to equal 4. I may actually just turn that up. I'll turn it up for the next video. But move speed equals 4. And turn speed is also going to equal 4. Now these can be changed later on to whatever value you find out works best when you go through your testing. But move speed and turn speed, these here are the variable names. I could have called it SPD, I could have called it MS, but they're not as useful as move underscore speed. Another thing you want to be aware of is naming conventions for variables, not just for sprites and objects, but for variables as well. So I've used an underscore to separate everything. You may see in some work that people use camel case. So lowercase for the first word, uppercase for the second. I'm used to programming in Python, and so I tend to use this quite a bit. It doesn't matter what convention you follow, as long as you follow a consistent naming convention. Now there is a reason that I didn't just say speed. That's because speed is a property of object tank, or it's a property of every object. The default value is 0. But if I set speed here to 4, it's going to start the tank moving in whatever direction it's facing. The default direction is also 0, which is facing to the right. So I can't use this, and you'll note that this has gone red, which means it's a property of this object. When I create a variable, that's now also a variable that belongs to this object, but it's one that we've made ourselves, so it doesn't go red. So that's the create event. I'm going to add a few keyboard events here. I'm going to add keyboard left, and if you might prefer WASD controls, you could add keyboard A instead. And in here, we're going to set the direction to increase. Now to do an increase, it's plus equals. So this will increase direction by turn speed. Okay, so I'm going to increase the direction by turn speed. Now I'm just going to run paint here. Bring up paint, and I want to demonstrate something. There is a reason that when I drew my tank, I drew it facing the right. There's my tank facing the right. In GameMaker, the direction property can be from 0 to 359. 0 is this way. As we go counterclockwise, the number increases. So 90 is actually facing up. And then we keep going counterclockwise. Of course, 180 is over here. This is the direction. 270 is down. And 359 is like, just down lower here. So if we decrease the direction into negative numbers, then we start to go down this way. GameMaker's smart enough to wrap around. Okay, so it's not going to start doing odd things here. Negative degrees will make it go clockwise. So we want it to turn left or go counterclockwise. And to do that, we increase the direction. So that's what we're going to be doing in here. Direction plus equals turn speed. If, depending on who your teacher is, depending on what resources you've been looking at, you may have seen it done this way. Direction equals direction plus turn speed. These are both the same thing. I prefer the top method just because it's quicker to write and it's less prone to mistakes, in my opinion. You can use whichever you prefer. So what's happening here, direction plus equals turn speed. And then we're going to update the image angle. This is another property that belongs to the object. It's going to equal the new direction value. Okay, so the image angle is actually going to change. Otherwise, our object will change rotation, but the image, the sprite that's associated with it, won't update. So image angle equals direction. And I'm going to repeat this. So I'm going to duplicate this here. I don't think I can duplicate events. For keyboard, right. And then here, I'm going to change this. So direction minus equals turn speed. Remember, if we're going clockwise or turning right, if we look at this tank, if we were sitting in that tank, then counterclockwise is left and clockwise is right. So we want to decrease the number of degrees on this. I'm going to reduce that. So that's all good. Now we need up and down. Now I would prefer to do this in code, but there's a few things that I don't want to get up to just yet using if statements. So instead I'm going to use key press. And I'm going to use key press up, and I'm going to add another one for key release. Well, not down. Change that to key release up. And in here, very simple line of code. Speed equals move speed. And release up, speed equals 0. Okay, there is another way that I could do speed, but I'm not going to worry about it now. I'm not sure what this little cog is doing. All right, there we go. So I can test this now. Really easy to test. Create a room, throw my tank in the room, hit play. It'll interpret it down here, and then, oh, now that rotation is really weird. Okay, it's moving, it's working, but the rotation is weird. And this is an extra little complexity you have to deal with in Game Maker. The origin of this sprite is currently this corner little pixel right here, and that's where it's rotating about. See, if I place my mouse point there, it spins around that point. It's really easy to change. Go into the sprite tank, and I'm going to set it so it rotates roughly around that point there. Maybe back a little bit. And I'll click play. So I'll just check that. So now it should rotate around that point, which it does. Okay, and that feels much more like a tank. So that's pretty good. I'll click that. Next video, we'll look at adding a turret that points towards the player's mouse. And then from there, we'll look at adding some bullets that shoot out of the turret.